Picture this. It's 2003. A walrus mustachioed man with the emotional range of a brick and a hyperactive man-child in a Hawaiian shirt walk into a junkyard in San Francisco. One of them wants to know if you can survive a car crash by filling it with packing peanuts. The other one just wants to blow something up. Discovery Channel gives them a budget, a camera crew, and apparently zero adult supervision. And somehow this becomes one of the most important science shows in television history. Within 2 years, teachers are assigning episodes as homework. NASA is watching. A sitting US president calls in to request they revisit an experiment. A cable show about blowing things up is influencing how a generation thinks about science at a national level. That is not normal. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Behind all of that, behind the explosions, the cultural impact, the classroom screenings, something was already going wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously, just quietly, steadily, decision by decision.
Caved in on him, but there's a bonus. It's opened up a rabbit hole above.
Until the show that spent 14 years telling you to question everything became a product that couldn't question anything at all. This is MythBusters, and this is how it destroyed itself. Before MythBusters, science on television meant one of two things. Either a guy in a lab coat explaining photosynthesis with a plastic leaf, or a nature documentary where a lion ate a gazelle in slow motion. That was it. That was the full menu.
Thousands of pounds of soil slithers south.
Then MythBusters showed up and asked a completely different question. What if science was actually fun? The premise was deceptively simple. Take a myth, a rumor, a movie scene, an urban legend, build something, test it, and if necessary, blow it up. Then give it a verdict. Confirmed, plausible, or busted.
That hole big enough that you could crawl out of. There's no way you're crawling through 6 feet of dirt. Look how much trouble you had with 2 feet.
No PhD required, no condescension, no pretending the audience is stupid. Just curiosity, with explosives. At the center of it were two people who, on paper, should not have worked together. Adam Savage was pure chaos. Loud, expressive, the kind of guy who looked like he might high-five you and accidentally set you on fire at the same time. Jamie Hyneman was the exact opposite. Precise, controlled, emotionally unreadable in a way that felt almost engineered. The human version of a warning label. If warning labels also had a walrus mustache and genuinely did not care what you thought about it. Together, they were perfect, not because they got along, but because they didn't. That friction, that contrast was the show, and audiences felt it immediately. Within a few seasons, MythBusters wasn't just popular, it was everywhere. Teachers were assigning episodes in classrooms, kids were citing it in science fairs, even NASA was watching.
Whoa! Jamie and I have tried out some courses ourselves.
A cable show about blowing things up was influencing how people thought about science at a national level. But here's the part nobody noticed at the time. Even in those early seasons, while everything looked like it was working, while the ratings were climbing and the explosions were getting bigger, the clock had already started ticking. Here's something Adam Savage admitted years later that most people glossed over. By season 3, they were already running out of myths. Season 3, out of 14. Think about what that means. The entire show runs on one resource: ideas, myths, rumors, movie scenes, things people half believe might be true.
As the guys have put the movie mayhem back into this myth.
And once you burn through the classics, the Hollywood stunts, the viral stories, the things everyone's always wondered about, you have to start digging. Deeper and deeper into territory that's either been done before or barely worth testing in the first place. At some point, you're making an episode about whether yawning is contagious, and you have to wonder who exactly greenlit that one. The show kept working, the episodes stayed entertaining, but the engine was already being pushed past its natural limit, and the people running it knew it.
On his ass the whole way, with the sole exception that when he sees me and takes off.
So they made a decision, and on the surface it looked like the right one. They expanded. A second team, 3 new faces running their own experiments in parallel. More myths per episode, more variety, more personality. It fixed the pacing problem instantly. The show felt bigger, faster, louder. The audience loved it. What nobody said out loud was the obvious truth hiding underneath that solution. You just made the show dependent on 5 people instead of 2. And in television, the more people a show depends on, the more expensive it gets, the more leverage those people have, the more reasons a network eventually finds to start cutting. MythBusters didn't solve its problem in season 3. It delayed it. And when that bill finally came due 10 years later, Discovery Channel made sure someone else paid it. The build team wasn't supposed to define MythBusters, but over time they did. Carrie Byron brought curiosity and relatability, the audience's point of view, the person asking the questions everyone else was thinking. Grant Imahara brought precision and engineering credibility, the quiet confidence of someone who could actually make things work, which on a show this chaotic was frankly essential. And Tori Belleci brought energy, the guy willing to test things in ways that felt just reckless enough to be entertaining. The guy who looked like he was one bad decision away from a hospital visit and somehow made that appealing. Together, they weren't just a side act. They were half the show. Episodes now had momentum. While Adam and Jamie were carefully designing one experiment with the energy of two people who had never once agreed on anything, the build team was usually doing something louder, faster, or more chaotic in parallel. It created rhythm, contrast, balance. You weren't just watching science, you were watching 5 very different personalities collide with it. For years, this was the formula. Not Adam and Jamie, not the myths, the combination of all 5. That's what people came back for, which is why what happened next makes absolutely no sense unless you look at it from a spreadsheet. And Discovery Channel, it turns out, did exactly that. After more than a decade on television, the build team weren't side characters anymore. They were part of the identity.
In sand experiment that those types of pressures on your chest cavity can get very dangerous very quick.
Which is exactly why what happened next didn't feel like a casting change. It felt like something being surgically removed. When their contracts came up for renewal, Kari, Grant, and Tori did what anyone would do after 10 years on a hit show. They asked for a raise, not something outrageous, just something that reflected what they had become. Essential, irreplaceable, the kind of people whose absence you would immediately notice. Discovery's response wasn't a negotiation. It was an offer designed to fail. According to people close to the production, the terms were so restrictive and the pay so low that it didn't feel like a deal. It felt like an exit strategy, a way to push out 3 beloved cast members without technically firing them. Clean hands, ugly outcome. And it worked exactly as planned. Carrie Byron, Grant Imahara, and Tori Belleci walked away. 10 years, 1 bad contract offer, gone. On screen, Adam Savage told the audience the show was going back to its roots. Nobody watching really believed that, because this wasn't a return to form, it was a cost reduction with better PR.
Casket. But now what we're going to do is we're going to test the part of the myth that if you did bust through the casket, could you dig through 6 feet of dirt?
Discovery had looked at 5 people, identified the 3 who couldn't carry the show alone, and quietly made them an offer they couldn't accept. Efficient, ruthless, and dressed up as a creative decision, which somehow made it worse. The reaction online was immediate, not quiet disappointment, anger. Reddit didn't speculate about what happened. Reddit understood exactly what happened. Fans who had watched these 5 people for a decade weren't confused, they were done. And you could feel the difference on screen almost instantly. Without the build team, the show didn't just get smaller, it got slower. The dual story structure that gave each episode momentum was gone. The contrast, the chaos, the balance, all of it disappeared. What was left was still called MythBusters, but something about it felt hollowed out, like a theme park that kept the name but quietly removed all the rides. This wasn't a creative reset, it was an accounting decision dressed up as one.
That was so much fun.
MythBusters didn't just lose 3 cast members, it lost half of itself. And Discovery saved some money, so at least someone was happy. And then there was the other thing, the thing that had always been there but was suddenly impossible to ignore. Adam Savage and Jamie Hyneman were never friends, not off camera, not privately, not even after 25 years of knowing each other. In Adam's own words, in a quarter century they had never once had dinner alone together, not one meal. 2 people who spent over a decade working side by side, building explosives, filming in remote locations, traveling internationally.
Plausible.
The next survival technique we're going to try is breaking the window.
And not once did either of them suggest getting a bite to eat. Let that sink in. They were colleagues. That was the full extent of it. Adam had worked for Jamie before the show existed, and from the beginning, their relationship was built on function, not friendship. They respected each other's skills. They trusted each other professionally. But off camera, they were essentially 2 people who had agreed to keep their distance indefinitely and found it worked fine. And for years, that was actually part of what made the show great. The contrast was entertaining in a way that felt completely unscripted, because it was. You had chaos and control, emotion and logic, a guy who wanted to make it dramatic and a guy who found drama mildly irritating. Adam once said Jamie didn't give a single thought to the camera. Jamie described himself as a racehorse attached to a freight wagon. Neither of them was wrong, but tension only works when there's something balancing it out. For years, that balance was the build team. 5 people instead of 2 meant the friction had somewhere to go. It got absorbed, redirected, turned into entertainment. Once the build team was gone, that buffer disappeared. It was just Adam and Jamie, alone, doing myths together on a show that was already running low on ideas. If that sounds exhausting, it's because it was. By the final seasons, you could see it. The energy was different, not explosive, just tired. 2 professionals doing their jobs extremely well, and both of them quietly aware that this had run its course. The dynamic that had once defined the show was still there.
Slides his way into the coffin as he prepares to literally put his life on the line.
You ready?
It just wasn't enough anymore. But the most revealing moment in MythBusters' entire run didn't happen on screen. It happened behind it. In 2008, the team started working on an episode about RFID technology, specifically how easy it might be to hack the chips embedded in credit cards, passports, and contactless payment systems. It was exactly the kind of thing MythBusters was built for: practical, relevant, a little dangerous, and genuinely useful for the audience to understand. The perfect episode. So they did what they always did. They started researching. 1 phone call. That's all it took. Because that one research call somehow triggered a conference call involving the chief legal counsel of American Express, Visa, Discover, and every other major credit card company simultaneously. Not one company sending a politely worded email. All of them. At the same time. Lawyers, not scientists. That's how worried they were about a television show testing whether their technology was secure. The MythBusters team, to their credit, was honest about what happened next. They were, in Adam's own words, way outgunned. The message from the legal teams was simple: air this episode and the advertisers walk. No negotiation, no compromise, no counteroffer. Just a very expensive, very coordinated reminder of who was actually paying for the lights. And just like that, the experiment disappeared. No explosion, no test, no verdict. Discovery Channel, a network that markets itself on curiosity, on education, on the joy of figuring out how things work, folded without a fight. The topic was shut down, permanently placed off limits, because Visa asked nicely and also threatened to take all their money with them. Here's where it gets even better. When Adam later spoke about this publicly at a conference, the story started spreading.
Assuming you could open the coffin lid, escape is just conceivable.
People were rightfully outraged, and then, shortly after, Adam walked his own account back, said it had nothing to do with Discovery or advertisers, said it was an internal production decision, not clarified, walked back, which is almost impressive in its own way. The show that built its entire identity on telling you what's actually true, just told you something wasn't true, then told you the first thing was also not true, and apparently expected you to pick one and move on. The myth MythBusters could never bust was the myth that it was independent. It wasn't. It was a product. And when the product's advertisers called, the network answered.
Here in an abandoned neighborhood in Marina, California, where my crew has set up a course and I'm just supposed to drive.
Turns out some myths are too expensive to bust. By the time MythBusters ended in 2016, it didn't feel like the same show anymore. The build team was gone. The energy was different. The ideas were thinner, stretched across 14 years of production. Adam and Jamie were still professional, still committed, but visibly ready for it to be over. The reboot that followed in 2017 without either of them lasted 2 seasons and disappeared without leaving a single cultural footprint, which, if you think about it, is the most MythBusters ending possible. Test the hypothesis, get a result, accept the result. Hypothesis, you can replace the original cast. Result, busted, because it was never about the format, never about the explosions, never even really about the myths. It was about 5 specific people with specific chemistry who made curiosity feel exciting, who made failure feel interesting, who made science feel like something worth paying attention to.
Well, that went pretty much as good as I could have imagined.
You cannot manufacture that in a casting competition. You cannot replicate it with a new lineup. And you cannot replace Grant Imahara, who passed away in 2020, with a winner from a spin-off show called MythBusters: The Search, which is a real thing that existed and also did not work. At its best, MythBusters was proof of concept, proof that you could make people care about the scientific method without dumbing it down. Proof that being wrong on camera was more interesting than being right. Proof that a walrus mustachioed man and a hyperactive man-child who genuinely could not stand each other were somehow inexplicably perfect television. And then Discovery Channel, Visa, American Express, and the slow machinery of cable television took it apart. Not in one dramatic moment, not with one catastrophic failure, just piece by piece, contract by contract, advertiser by advertiser, until what remained had the name, had the logo, had the format, and none of the soul. MythBusters spent 14 years telling you not to believe something just because someone said it was true. And in the end, the one thing it couldn't challenge was the system that paid for it. They busted myths. They just couldn't bust the one they were part of. Confirmed. If you made it this far, you already know the drill. Subscribe to BuzzKill TV.